welcome everybody. Today we are talking about transportation pretty broadly. We have a panel with great representation of expertise in different modes of transportation here in Edmonton, as well as working in different sectors and in different roles. So I just quickly will introduce myself. I'm Dr. Emily Grise. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Alberta. So I've been there a couple years now, several years now. And I am a transportation researcher. I work on projects on lots of different topics related to public transit planning and operations. And what I'm going to do is have each of our panelists introduce themselves, state their relevant experience in transportation, working within public or private sector, what sort of more specific experience do you bring to the table or to this panel, and just start off with a bit of an icebreaker. What ultimately brought you to either work in transportation or have a vested interest in seeing transportation develop or move in a more sustainable and efficient manner? So I'll start off with Olga to my right.
Hello, my name is Olga Messinis, and a little bit about my background. I've spent the majority of my career in transportation in the public sector for the last 18 years, and the last 2 years or so in private consulting, again in transportation. And it's really interesting, the icebreaker of what brought me into transportation. When I started my career, I started out in construction. It was neighborhood reconstruction, and the thing that always really drew me specifically to transportation was this interconnectedness and this relationship between how we move, how our economies can scale, and really, at the end of it all, how that all links into our well-being and a healthy society. And so I've kind of run the gamut of operations, traffic management, planning active transportation infrastructure, building active transportation infrastructure, and talking about it in great detail over the last number of years. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Janna, who's doing some really interesting work in transit.
Thank you. So I'm Janna Widmer. I am, again, more public sector experience. So I've spent the majority of my career at Strathcona County, so Shore Park. And I actually started out more in the community, neighborhood planning, long-range planning, urban planner by trade kind of thing. And I really kind of grew to really get really interested in that community building, transportation, how we design our communities and how that transportation choice gets affected in our built environment, and that intersection between all the different modes that we can take and all those opportunities or not opportunities that we have to take those modes in the communities that we live in. And then I had the opportunity within Strathcona County to move over to the transit department, and I've been there for the past few years, and I've been working as the manager of our strategic initiatives and customer experience team. So that's really our transit route planning, and our scheduling of our transit routes. But there's that strategic initiatives part. So that's really kind of seeing the trends in transit and what's coming down the pipe over the next number of years, and working with our regional partners. So really having a lot of fun right now, working and collaborating with the City of Edmonton and other municipalities within the region on our regional collaboration and framework for regional transportation. So I'm going to pass it over.
Got one too. Hi everyone. I'm Ashley Salvador, City Councillor here at the City of Edmonton, representing folks in Ward Métis, which is I describe it as East Central Edmonton. And it's my first term on council. Prior to that, I actually studied sustainability at Dalhousie University and went on to get a master's degree in urban planning. And what initially drew me to transportation is really the intersection of land use and transportation as it relates to climate change. we know that land use and transportation are two of the biggest contributors to climate change, and I initially became very interested in cities as the place where we can start to take some real action in reshaping our urban environments to reduce emissions overall and create more resilient communities. Also have a background in sociology, and I think a lot about how our urban environments and how our transportation systems can enhance inclusion, equity, and really a sense of belonging within our cities and neighborhoods. So kind of come at it from an interdisciplinary background, but nowadays, transit is really the backbone of a lot of the conversations we have around the council table when we talk about creating, not just socially vibrant and inclusive cities, environmentally sustainable cities, but economically viable cities and cities where we're attracting and retaining talent. Transit's at the center of that. So looking forward to today's conversation.
Okay, thank you very much. So just want to really acknowledge the wealth of knowledge in this room, or in this panel, I should say, in this room, I'm sure as well. Really speaking across the different modes and different efforts that are underway or in the planning and long-range planning phases. So just to get a little bit more of a deeper sense of transportation in Edmonton, where we're going, medium, short-term, anywhere up to long-term, I'm going to ask each of you the question about when we think about our future transportation goals or mobility necessities, kind of thinking pretty broadly. In Edmonton region, so not only thinking about the city of Edmonton, but municipalities that are, within the CMA, which are often, interacting with Edmonton or vice versa. So what are those main transportation goals that we should be thinking about? And really describe what those goals look like. So really, what are we trying to achieve as we, invest and plan and implement transportation strategies? What are these key goals?
Do you want me to start? I can do that. Okay. Councillor Salvador actually mentioned something that I wish I mentioned. And climate is a big one. Right now, I think we're seeing a lot of the effects of climate change, and you're seeing it in a lot of different ways. You're seeing it in the disruption of economies. You're seeing it in terms of how we're investing in the transportation network. And when I look at the future of transportation, it's really a strategic investment, and we're doing it already. We're planning for it, and we have been. I know from a City of Edmonton perspective, full disclosure, I used to work for the City of Edmonton. A lot of our transportation master plans and the city plan are actually quite explicit in terms of how we grow the city and how we grow the transportation network in improving mass transit, improving opportunities for active transportation. I think those are the key goals. As you know, you may have been caught in traffic recently, but our transportation networks are really quite contained. They're closed systems, and unless we're building more roads on top of existing infrastructure, it's just not feasible. So how are we planning to move 1.25 million to 2 million people in the future? And so, from my perspective, it's really focusing on mass transit and getting as many of us, onto transit and outside of our vehicles in the long term.
Yeah, plug for transit as well. Definitely thinking about investment in transit as we move forward. So again, talking about trying to move people within our communities, and really trying to think about even transportation across the region, right? People try to get to jobs. They don't see boundaries, right? They work maybe in one municipality, but they live in another. And then that equity piece, right? People working in different sectors, can they get to the jobs that they want to apply for, that they are qualified for, and do they have the access to get there? Sometimes, a lot of us, we drive our cars and we think we have such freedom getting around, but then there are those that, they're bound to transit, and do they have that same efficiency and same opportunities? So there's that. Always think about that equity lens as we move forward into the future. And, when you think about our growing community and investing, how do we invest in transit, not just for new capital, but in new areas or big fancy new project, but even in operation and maintenance, and just trying to make sure that our system can run smoothly and deal with that idea that if we want to put more people onto transit, even in our existing routes and existing infrastructure, are we still maintaining that and investing in it so we can move more people in that, not just new fancy, which is great, new capital projects is great, but just in that existing system.
Yeah, I think for me, it comes down to a few things. When I look at our very explicit goals that are outlined in Edmonton City Plan, for example, we have a goal of reaching 50% mode shift. So 50% of trips should be made by public or active modes as we work towards a population of 2 million. And I always say, if we reach a population of 2 million and we don't have those alternative options and everybody is in one way or another forced to drive just to meet their daily needs, we're all going to be stuck in traffic. And that is going to result in a city that is less livable, but also less competitive. I'll come back to that piece I mentioned earlier. When I think about businesses and companies that are looking to locate in certain areas, they look for effective public transit networks. They look for active modes, and they look for cities that can foster, a healthy and well lifestyle. So I think that economic attraction and talent retention piece is really huge. The other piece I wanted to mention is just around affordability. It is becoming increasingly clear that car ownership is expensive. We look at younger folks who are choosing not to get their license, choosing not to drive. They need options too, and a lot of them are turning to public and active modes. So being able to create a prosperous city, being able to create a city that's affordable and attainable for everyone depends on having functional public and active transit networks. And yeah, I think it's interesting. I know you had mentioned sort of this parallel where folks will think, when we talk about freedom, the car is often associated with freedom. And are we really free if we have to own a car just to get a loaf of bread, right? So it is really about creating cities where there is choice over how we get around just to meet our daily needs.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a lot of different goals. Just to reiterate some of the main ones. Well, I think one of the most significant sort of overarching goals I would summarize is mass transit and active transportation, and those being interactive and complementary when necessary, and that our transportation system enables competitive economic vibrancy in the city, really enables people to have that freedom, that choice to choose a car-free lifestyle if that is what they want. I think it's all about choice, and that, intersects so nicely with equity. What we talked about is having, not only thinking about ourselves, but how we can move around all the different people we have in our society and really enable that freedom of mobility, because that intersects really importantly with health, which was mentioned earlier. So really, really important goals mentioned here. So looking on to our next question, thinking about the Edmonton metropolitan region, including the city of Edmonton and then their most nearest surrounding municipalities, what are some of the unique opportunities that Edmonton has to offer? That could be our physical and built infrastructure, or anything from our our social fabrics, our community. What is unique to Edmonton that we can really leverage in order to meet our transportation goals? And then the flip side of that, what are some of our biggest challenges that we need to acknowledge and strategically work towards or address really head on? So you can start with either one of those, but I think, there's quite a bit of both, and I'd like to see what we really speak about.
I think what's unique and actually an opportunity in Edmonton specifically, when we grew as a city, we grew during a period of time where we were really focused on building as many traffic lanes as possible for as many cars as possible. So we have this, like, you might not think of it when you're stuck on in traffic on 99th Street, but we have a lot of right-of-way which can be reimagined, and when you look at this space a little bit differently than how it's used today, the opportunities are much more significant. I think about it as a region and what connects us. A lot of the, major arterials and highways. There's a ton of opportunity there, and Edmonton is this. It's like this nucleus. It's like really great hub, and if you kind of consider it as a bit of a hub and spoke kind of situation. We have all of these communities that are desirable to live in. And there is some choice in how a lot of these folks access the services and employment nodes within the city, but they're not as far-reaching as they could be. And I think so. One of the challenges that I see is looking at things at a much more regional level and really collaborating, which is really tough when we're all faced with diminishing budgets, competing priorities, and at the end of the day, we're all fighting for those same resources, those same budgets, the same provincial dollars, and I think that's one of our biggest challenges, but also an opportunity to really come together and prioritize what we want to see in a transportation network that will last the next 50 years to 100 years.
Yeah, I think I just want to build up a little bit what Olga was saying about regional collaboration. I think, again, because of our geography, and we have a bunch of smaller cities and communities that do kind of right next to Edmonton, Edmonton's in the middle, we do actually have a really great geographic advantage in that as we continue to build out that, active transportation and regional transit networks, that geography is there to kind of build off of. And I think also we do actually have a pretty good history of regional collaboration. We do have the Edmonton Metropolitan Region Board that's been, operating for a while now. And even on the transit side, historically, we've had lots of regional transit collaboration across the region. We have the UPass program, we have the ARC card. If people here take transit, you can now use the ARC card system across the regional transit system. So we do have that history of collaboration, and we're continuing that as part of our future going forward. So again, we have a new regional collaboration framework, which everyone within the, every region in Edmonton that has a transit system sits on now a regional collaboration table, and we're working on how do we make transit just easier across the region and that framework. And in part of that, we are working towards applying for the new Canadian Public Transit Fund. So that's another really big thing that's happening in our world right now, where the federal government has $3 billion per year over the next about 10 years for transportation investment. And that includes transit and active transportation. It's across all of Canada, so we don't get the $3 billion, but $2 billion out of that, though, is for metro regions to work on their transit and active transportation together. So it's like you need to work together, come up with what your projects are, and try and apply for this funding. So we're actively working on that, and it's a great opportunity, and it's supposed to outline like kind of a 10-year plan of like, what do we need for this region for transit and active transportation? So it's really exciting work right now that we're getting started on, and yeah, that's a great opportunity for us.
I really appreciate all those points, and would agree on all fronts. I think I'll try not to repeat too much and add a few new points. Maybe on the challenge side, I'll repeat the first one. We're a sprawling prairie city, and geographically, physically, we're not bounded by mountains or an ocean or those physical things that would stop us from continuing to grow outwards. And I think the flip side of being a sprawling prairie city, as Olga mentioned, is that that is an opportunity to reimagine some of our spaces. And I think about even the city's curbside management strategy, where we're saying, hey, we have all of this curbside space. How can we re-envision that and make the best use of that strategic public asset, whether that is for active mobility lanes or widened sidewalks or parklets. I think that's a really exciting opportunity that's built off of just sort of a natural challenge that we have, given the way that our city has grown over the last few decades. I'll focus on some opportunities and some things that I'm excited about. It has to be mentioned at some point. $100 million towards active transportation, I think, is a huge opportunity for the city of Edmonton to truly build a connected network of bike infrastructure. I think we've done a good job over the years of building out some excellent segments of infrastructure, but being able to connect those segments so that it is a complete network and actually gets people where they want to go and need to go in a safe and efficient manner, I think that's a huge opportunity. It's a historic investment and really exciting to see Edmonton leading the way in that regard and really following through on plans that have been in place for quite a while. We have been, and as an organization, as a city, as a community, the plans are there, and having the will to follow through on those and fund those is a really big opportunity. I actually wanted to highlight an opportunity I think is an exciting one, but maybe we could pay a little more attention to it, is micromobility. So the city of Edmonton actually has some of the best usage, not just in Canada, not just in North America, but around the world, which I was shocked to hear that. But Edmontonians are using micromobility, and I think that's a really interesting opportunity to think about. How can we lean into that? How can we make sure that that form of mobility is accommodated within our larger network and integrated into our active mode network, and also integrated into our transit system? So I think that's a big one. And then maybe just the third one I'll mention. I think we have an interesting opportunity with, maybe I'll describe it this way. Edmonton has a really fascinating sort of civic society, nonprofit advocacy organization space. Like, I'm thinking of the Paths for Peoples, the Edmonton Transit Riders Associations, where there is an upswell of community members who want to see better transportation in their city. And it's really powerful when you can get everyday citizens and residents and Edmontonians advocating for the types of changes that we're all talking about up here. And I think that's sort of a uniquely Edmonton thing, where we're doers and builders and go-getters, and being able to activate those networks, I think is a massive opportunity. I was at a train party this last weekend with the Edmonton Transit Riders Association. They chartered an LRT to go check out the new Blatchford station. And there were hundreds of people there. So that type of energy is something we need to capitalize on.
Yeah, I heard that event actually sold out. It was free though, right? Yeah, it's free tickets. But yeah, that's really what I was hoping to see, is that discussion about both our physical infrastructure and then Edmonton being this sort of unique standout in the province of Alberta. We talked a lot about capital investment opportunities, such as the $100 million active transportation, as well as the really exciting federal government permanent public transit fund, which, for those of you who are not aware, that is dedicated towards capital funding. So investing in new infrastructure, perhaps new vehicles and buses, anything new and shiny, with the opportunity for some ribbon cutting. But one of the biggest challenges, that it's not only an Edmonton challenge, but a challenge that we're facing everywhere, particularly as it comes to public transit, is within securing funding for operational spending, right? As our region is increasing in population and ridership has more than picked up, that's just a big challenge, is where does the operational funding come from in a very secure, sustainable, reliable way. So I just wanted to pick up on the conversation about funding. And speaking broadly about capital and operational funding, what are some of the priorities that the municipality and our surrounding region really needs to be thinking about and doing in order to really have that really sufficient forms of funding for active and sustainable modes of transportation like public transit? And how can we ensure that that funding is sustainable in the sense that we know it'll be there year over year, it's not as precarious, and it's secure in the long term. So I'll start first with Councillor Ashley Salvador.
Yeah, I was just nodding along as you were saying that. Yeah, there's lots of excitement around the ribbon cutting on the capital side, and that is absolutely important. It is critical. But you're right. I mean, municipalities across the country are struggling on the operational side. I think we desperately need to re-examine cities' relationships and the way that we're funded. And I mean, it cuts across beyond just transit, but cities nowadays are the economic engines of our provinces, and ensuring that we actually have the ability to deliver on the expectations of the people that we're serving is critical, for all the reasons that we've been talking about today. At this point, we are very much playing catch up when it comes to delivering on the service hours that Edmontonians expect. I think we've chronically underfunded our public transit system for decades at this point, and we're now in a place where we, are trying to encourage more Edmontonians to take public transit, to take active modes. But if it is not convenient, easy, and reliable, it's going to be a difficult ask to make. So having those conversations about what sustainable and ongoing funding could look like from an operational side is something that I'd be very excited to explore. I think. Yeah, I look at our service hour gap, and as a city, being able to quantify that, being able to say, this is where we know where we need to be, this is where we are right now, and strategically positioning ourselves so that we can capitalize on opportunities, whether it's the permanent federal transit fund or otherwise, is something that all cities should be looking to do, so that we can leverage those opportunities when they do become available.
Yeah, I probably have a lot to say on this one a little bit. So yeah, I think one of the really glaring things that came out from the pandemic was I think a lot of transit agencies really relied on fares to fund part of the transit system. And when the pandemic happened, we really realized how much the reduction in people taking transit and that reduced revenue really impacted the transit system. We saw the gap on the revenue side, and I think we all know in this room that public transit doesn't pay for itself, but that revenue still contributes to part of that funding model. And so obviously lots of our municipalities have bounced back, and we have great ridership again, and we're really seeing people coming back to transit. But that still showed that transit does have a need to look for other funding opportunities when it comes to operations and maintenance. You think about vehicles, these buses are on the road all day driving. There's maintenance involved in that. Those buses are doing how many kilometers? How long is that bus going to last? It's going to have to be replaced. It's going to have to be fixed. And we really have to think about that infrastructure piece on the operational side. Another thing, too, is obviously buses need a place to be parked and stayed. So we have our garage infrastructure, right, that we need funding for as we grow, and we need more buses. We need a place to put them, right? So that's where we look at that storage piece. And then I think one of the biggest eye-openers for me when I moved over to transit from more urban planning, community planning, was the technology involved in transit and transportation. The software programs involved was like shocking to me. These things have GPS, we have the smart bus, we have the ARC program. There's just a lot of computer software involved in transit, and understanding as we grow in AI and grow in just that technology piece, there's a big impact to transit. And then the future transit, and we talk about climate, we talk about zero emission. What does that mean for transit and the transit industry? And I think the other thing to remember is, you know, we can bring in an electric bus, we can bring in a hydrogen bus, but again, there's that infrastructure piece on the storage and maintenance side. We need the people trained to know how to deal with these different buses that are no longer diesel. Do we have the right charging infrastructure in our garages? So, you know, there's just a lot of pieces to the puzzle, and that's a big investment because it's actually coming sooner, I think, than we think. There's a lot of push and a lot of talk about zero emission and electric and hydrogen, and where are we going to be in 5 years with that? We really have a lot of discussions right now with bus manufacturers and their engines and what's the timelines, and we're having those conversations because we know it's coming closer to really think about our fleet renewal and, you know, at what point is our renewal really going to be more on the zero emission side as we kind of move forward?
Maybe just, if you want to touch on it for a little bit, but Strathcona County and the City of Edmonton are collaborating right now on the trial of the hydrogen bus.
Yeah. So we have a hydrogen bus pilot project. There's a lot of collaborators on it. So the City of Edmonton has a hydrogen bus, and Strathcona County also has a hydrogen bus. And I think part of that is really testing these different zero emission bus technologies. And I think the big thing for us is we're in a colder climate. Can it travel the kilometers that we need it to? There's definitely been some promising things about it, but we're working on that right now. And I think that's part of any kind of new technology, new system. You have to go through all the, you know, you have to test it out, you have to see, and like with time, as we understand, you know, what's happening with it, we talk with the manufacturers about what we need out of it, what could it do better, knowing that, you know, we have to, you know, eventually get it right because they're coming quickly. And it's been a really interesting pilot because we do know in our region hydrogen's you know, really promoted because of our industry, and it's quite exciting.
Thanks. So just one last question before we have a few minutes left for any audience questions. You know, I think a really important theme here is that Edmonton is, as in respect to transportation, we have some pretty significant goals, especially as it pertains to mode shifts, so that please correct me if I'm wrong, by 2050, 50% of trips by active and 2 million. So whichever one comes first, 2050 or probably the 2 million population target. Okay. And right now we're sitting at around what percent of trips by active and by active and public transit? About 10%? 10%, okay. So, you know, and I think we do need to have big goals and really, you know, think about how we have to get there, but there's going to be a lot of growing pains if we want to see that shift. So we do have to get a bit uncomfortable in our transportation systems and, you know, have some uncomfortable conversations, I think, particularly between council and our community, because not all the changes that we need to make are particularly comfortable to make those changes to transportation. But with that in mind, you know, thinking about, let's say, the short, medium term, 5-10-year term, what are some of the, let's say, top 3 priorities to transportation that need to be made? And, you know, think quite specific. And, you know, so what are those 3 priorities in order to really start seeing shifts in mode shift, but also towards just seeing transportation mobility patterns be more sustainable in Edmonton? So I'll start with you, Olga.
I think a really easy one, but it also touches on some challenges with operating funding, is network reliability, and I think this is quite broad to transit and active transportation. I'm going to give you a personal example. I wasn't always a cyclist. I didn't always commute to work by bike, but you know, after years of planning and being involved in building these networks, I started cycling to work in the winter, and And last year, I had the unfortunate experience of my reliable route that was always plowed, no longer plowed. And that kind of ended it for me, to be honest. And so, you know, talking with some colleagues, there was a bit of an operational gap in funding. There was going to be a certain portion of the network that was cleared, but like that was a very real example and a very real experience for myself, who built, advocated for a lot of this infrastructure, including how we operate it and maintain it. In talking with a lot of people over the last few years, and actually even as the firm that I was working for was actually helping plan for this $100 million spend on like completing the bike plan. And you know, one of the things that the big themes was around reliability, and I think that's that could broadly translate to transit as well. I know Janna and I we all talked. We talked before we came here, but these are some of the very real challenges that don't only face Edmontonians, but you know, face Canadians in general.
Yeah, I think you guys have probably heard a lot about it more recently, the last few years. It's nice seeing the understanding about the you know, the integration of housing and transit, really that becoming more of an eye-opener over the last number of years. And I'm really seeing the policy and the thoughtfulness on some of the new things coming down the pipe in terms of realizing that, you know, for that density piece, for that affordable housing piece, that transit is really, you know, also considered in that aspect, because it really, you know, how people move around and that equity lens. If we think about, you know, building those densities and trying that housing integration with transit, you can really uptake that move of those transportation choices. And then the idea of integrating that with services and work and employment, right? So I'm really trying to do that purposefully and really specifically, you know, I think it's been really, really neat. And, you know, it's more to come in the future, right? With a lot of the new, you know, the Canadian Public Transit Fund has really noted that, the housing and transit intersection, and then also I think the Housing Accelerator Fund and just a lot of the new programs coming down to us to look at those things. And I think integrated transportation, so always that first mile, last mile thought in terms of people moving, you know, easy and seamlessly. So if they're going to take transit, but they're going to bike a little bit, or, you know, there's just that idea that we really allowed that transportation choice, continue to work towards allowing that transportation choice in the future, and integrating transit and transportation modes. I think you guys see a lot of bikes on buses, and we have all the new, you know, bike share programs, and hopefully that can really start to work its way out, you know, throughout the region as well. But I think that's really exciting and something that we can continue to work on.
Yeah, I think, you know, thinking sort of in the next few years, I think Edmontonians need to start to see and feel some of the investments and changes in their own communities, and see what that looks like, feel what that feels like. I think when we talk about creating, a connected city where everyone can get around in ways that work for them, it's often at kind of this level, and there's almost a fear associated with that, because when we start talking about, you know, potentially reallocating space to different modes, I think there's a worry that will limit their movement or limit the way that they have previously been getting around. So what I'm really excited for, and I think will be a really big step, is when we actually start to see some of the active mode infrastructure being rolled out in our communities, so people can start to see how that can be integrated into their own lives. As you can imagine, I do a lot of door knocking and have a lot of conversations with folks in community, and something I often hear is, I would love to be able to bike with my kids to school. I would love to be able to commute via active modes, but I don't feel safe, or it is not convenient, or there isn't a safe lockup for my bike when I get to work at the other end of my trip. So being able to create those opportunities for people to just experience what that is like, I think will be really transformative. And that's one of the reasons I'm excited about the accelerated approach to the rollout of our active transit infrastructure, is so that we can, start to create, again, that network effect that gets people to where they need to go. I also think about, this is maybe a little bit of a longer term one, but coming back to the need for sustainable and predictable operational funding, I think we need to start looking at a dedicated transit fund or a dedicated renewal fund. And of course, there are conversations that need to happen across all levels of government, but I think that's something we can start to look at here locally as well, just to give ourselves that surety that as we continue to grow, we're going to have a line of sight as to how we're going to actually maintain and deliver on those expectations. So that's a conversation I'm really excited about. And yeah, I think, I really agree around network reliability. That's huge. And maybe just one more that I will add, just because it's kind of a fun one. I think there's going to be an interesting shift with the growth of e-bikes in particular, and just like a shift in demographic. I know when I'm out riding, I do these silly, very informal surveys when I'm on my e-bike. Like, how long have you had your e-bike? Usually, it's an older demographic. Like, a lot of seniors have started to adopt e-bikes, and a common thing that I'll hear is, I've never ridden more in my life, or I would not be out here riding if it wasn't for my e-bike. So I'm excited to see over the next 5-10 years how that really shifts the conversation and brings more people to the table who might not otherwise have been around it.
Great. Thanks so much. Okay, well, at this point, I'm going to see if there's any questions that anybody has in the audience. Starting right here.
Olga, I was thinking about your discussion about how you're a new winter rider and maybe kind of bike commuter. And I've done it for about 15 years between Calgary and here. So number one, I want to celebrate how much better Edmonton is making my day-to-day life. When I bought my new house, I was able to pick it based on bike lanes and school access and things like that. One of the challenges that I find many of us face, whether it's through transit or other alternative modes of transportation, is our ability to fully kick the car if we want to. So I find that the daily commute, many people are able to replace that with reliable transit, reliable biking, things like that. It's the other things where you're trying to get your kids to gymnastics or soccer and things like that. And so I was wondering if there's any strategies that you can maybe suggest or give us where we can start to fill in those gaps a little bit better. I know like bus service to industrial areas, for example, where you'll find those larger kind of kid-friendly activities are often not prioritized. And so while we're good at putting buses near people now, we're still missing those daily or weekly, I guess, trips that allow you to fully integrate the active modes.
I don't have the best answer to that, to be honest. But from some discussions that I have had with peers, neighbors, there are a number of people that have kind of strategically planned their lives around how they move. And I mean, that's one extreme, and that's probably the most available or the easiest. And so I know a lot of folks that are planning a lot of activities near home, near infrastructure, and sometimes they may have a car handy because hockey practice at 6 a.m. on a bike is just not going to happen. And that's really our reality. I think I think one of, and you probably know, I grew my career in traffic, and one of the things that I've kind of come to realize and kind of settled with an uncomfortable truth is for specific types of trips, we may not always be able to use active modes or transit. It's sometimes not going to be available to us, and maybe that's a little far away in the future. Maybe that's like a 20-year outlook. But one of the drivers around congestion and like greenhouse gas emissions. Like the transportation network is probably one of the biggest polluters at around like 30% GHG emissions, on average. And so it's those smaller trips that make a difference. And so it's the trip leaving work to go to the grocery store to pick up your kids to go home to make dinner, and you're time crunched. But, is there an option where, okay, there's safe infrastructure, so you don't have to get your kids from daycare and they could just ride their bikes home? I'm seeing it in my neighborhood, but like my neighborhood is a bit of an outlier. Like we extended the south side minimum grid to Strathcona and Garneau. And so, after school, like I see the network is just jammed. And half the time there isn't a parent around because people actually feel safe and it makes sense. So I don't have a great answer for you, but I think it's, what we should be focused on is, some of those smaller trips or some of those more regular trips, like commuting to work where, it's just a straight shot there and back. Or you have a day off and you're meeting a friend or family for coffee, and it's it's an easy trip on a bike or a bus.
Yeah, just very briefly as well. I feel like you could also be up here. You could switch spots with me. But I think this is also where the intersection of land use and transportation really come together. If we can get to a place where, at least the vast majority of your trips can be, within that 15 minutes that we always talk about, that's awesome. And I think car share is also going to be an interesting evolution. If we can get to that place, those occasional trips that are a little bit further, a little bit less convenient, and not necessarily as appropriate for an active mode or public transit. I'd be curious to see how that can weave into people's lives as well.
Yeah, I was hoping somebody would say also car sharing. As somebody who lived in Montreal and just saw how Communito has just evolved into such an asset in Montreal is just fantastic. There was a question at the back.
Yeah, we've been talking about the car culture in all kinds of terms. It's resulted, we sort of live with that because of 70 years of marketing, by vested interest around that. And I guess I'm curious why government at whatever level doesn't really see the need for more active advocacy. Is there no output or return on that investment, or what is the barrier? Like, why do we not hear more about benefits of active transportation? Health in the health ministry of the province, and civic authorities, they don't really seem to talk enough about it. I think Edmonton is above average in a lot of ways, as has been pointed out. But really, what's the barrier to helping us understand really maybe what is actually better for us? We really don't know what we should be asking for, I think, in some respects.
Sure, I can try to tackle that one. I mean, I'm also coming from somewhat of a biased place because I personally am very vocal about the need for that. But on the whole, I mean, I think the way that we frame active transportation, we need to get a lot better at it. We can talk about it from sort of a climate perspective, which is critically important. I also really try to lean into the economic perspective. Like, it is an economic imperative that we invest in public and active modes. And I don't think we make that connection or bridge that and explain that and talk about it to other levels of government as much as we could. I think the health lens is also underexplored and undercommunicated. When we talk about creating communities that are healthy and well, the way we move around them is a critical part of that. And being able to actually quantify the cost savings with having a healthier community where people can get around via active modes. Again, there's been some good research in that space, but I think even as locally elected officials, we don't do a good enough job communicating that. And one of the committees I sit on is the Energy Transition Climate Resilience Committee of Council. It's a long name, but it's basically a climate-focused committee that provides advice to council. And even around that table, we often talk about how, yes, we can talk about climate action from an environmental lens, but that health lens is massive. And it really resonates with people too. Like, people want to live a healthy, active lifestyle. So being able to communicate that up to other orgs and levels of government through advocacy is untapped, in my opinion.
It's puzzling. I mean, you've just outlined like several evidence-based arguments for active transportation. Besides you and Michael Jan's door knocking, like, who else is talking about it? That reaches public consciousness. That's the question, Michelle.
And just the last thing, I'll let other folks have a chance as well. I think other cities are taking note of our investments. And the step that we took to actually commit to building out our active transit network, like I said, that historic investment. And I know that other jurisdictions are looking to Edmonton as a leader in that space, saying, hey, if Edmonton can do that, maybe we can as well, as a bit of an example. So those types of decisions do have ripple effects, and in and of themselves provide some advocacy and leverage.
Do either of you want to add anything?
I could, I guess. I think, I mean, you've talked around it a little bit, but I think you look at every election cycle, and usually the folks in opposition of a lot of the things that I think all of us have been trying to do in our careers become election topics, and they're really tough. I think one of the things that I've been following a lot right now is what's happening in Ontario. And a few peers have written response papers to Bill 212, I think it's called. If you don't know what Bill 212 is, there's the province is putting a moratorium. It's not even a moratorium, actually. I think, yeah, it's not even a moratorium on bike lanes. They're essentially just saying you have to seek provincial permission to build any sort of active transportation in your city or community. And I'm having a hard time rationalizing why, because there's a strong health benefit. The economic benefit is massive in itself. Like, when you actually think about roadway networks that have active transportation infrastructure, maintenance costs are reduced over time. You have an upfront investment in keeping them clear, but when you actually talk about the infrastructure and it's not getting beat down, you're not having to do full depth reclamation on pavements because of this like vehicular traffic. You've got a healthier, happier, more connected community. People are moving through their community at a pace where you have this pride of ownership of where your taxes are going, and it's really it's tough, I think, for a lot of like administrators to continue leading that charge, knowing that every 4 years there's always this defense of why we're doing this and why this is important, and it's, I think we'll get over it. I think Edmonton as a region, and and Councillor Salvador talked about it as well. Like, we've done a lot of great things in Edmonton since 2016-ish. And it's sometimes a slow process. Of course, like our planning cycles can be quite long. When we talk about planning for infrastructure, building it, operating it, but I think one of the cool things, and I think the City of Edmonton does a really great job of actually demonstrating how well our active transportation infrastructure is used. And the one thing that I kind of always look at is winter ridership and how much winter ridership we retain year over year, and that number keeps growing. So I think the tides are changing. I still think that there's going to be tension, but it's happening slowly.
We also need to leverage our business community as a voice. They can get alongside us in that advocacy. We know that people who are showing up via active modes to businesses in our community are spending more money, they're spending more time, and having their voice alongside us. So it's not just, Ashley and City Council advocating to other orders, it's the entirety of our business community, civic society. That's also huge.
Yeah, I was going to actually kind of talk about it a little bit. I think when we see other, around the world, places that have really great active transportation, and we hear about, people that drive cars in those areas, they're also active transportation users, right? So I think a lot of it, it's great for the government or anyone to kind of say, like, you should do this because these are all the benefits, but it really is a grassroots thing, and I think that's what we're talking about a little bit more too is, over time, as you get more people using those active transportation modes, they might drive, but they might also bike, and they see that benefit, and you start to get bigger groups doing that. That'll kind of change the tide a little bit on the political front as well, right? I think right now we have a lot of people that are just core drivers, and what they're seeing is, this is impacting my commute, this is impacting things I do, and it's understandable on a personal basis, right? That's how they get around the community, that's how they live their lives. But if you can move the person to living their lives to walking a bit more, maybe taking the bike once in a while, they'll start to see the impact on that side as well, right? So I think, over time, from just the community using and utilization, that'll come.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Thanks.